Next up is Frederick Ingram, Vice President of the American Federation of Teachers out of Florida, a teachers union, and a powerful force in trying to preserve traditional public schools.
The number one choice in the state of Florida, where I'm from, is homeschool. And so, we've had homeschool, parochial school, private school, public school. But there is a concerted effort to try and dismantle, destabilize, and get rid of the public school. And that is unfair to the 90% of students who attend those public schools, namely being African American and brown children alike. We need to reinvest in our public schools. We're not saying that public schools are perfect, and I hope that you're not saying that charter schools are perfect.
Actually, I don't think anybody's saying that anything is perfect. I think what I keep hearing is that there are traditional schools that do work, charters that do work, traditional fail, charter fail. Focus on what works as opposed to say, well, that might work, but I don't really like it. Because I keep asking, why can't they coexist? Why can't you literally have traditional public schools and public charter schools at the same time?
They absolutely can exist, but I heard at the beginning of this conversation a condemnation of the public schools. And I don't think that that's the way that you get your point across, or that we improve schools. If we're going to improve schools, then we have to talk about the good and hard work that is going on in these struggling schools. Some of the best teaching in America is going on in these struggling schools in and around our country.
But Fred,
we have to replicate that.
Fred, I got to push you on that, because this is what I just heard. What I just heard is, don't criticize the traditional public schools that are working hard, but there are people who don't like charters who criticize charters. So guess what? Folks on both sides are criticizing. It's happening.
But let's understand what and who we're talking about. Remember that
we're talking about largely black kids who are not getting educated.
We're talking about black kids and black teachers and these black schools. So let's talk about it from a vantage point that most of the minority teachers in our country are coming from schools just like Howard University and other HBCUs. We're talking about 50% of all minority teachers are coming from HBCUs. We are inferring a condemnation on the kinds of education that we're putting out to these particular schools.
No, actually, I would say this, Fred. I would say this here. My position is very clear. Cristobal, I'm going to go to you next. My position is very clear. I don't like bad teachers, bad principals, bad administrators, bad school boards, bad politicians over school boards. No, because see, I'm real clear what I don't like. My point is this here. I want what works. And so, if there are traditional schools that work, study it, replicate it. If there are charters that work, study it, replicate it. Magnet, homeschool, online, I don't care.
Remember, when you're talking about a public school, you're talking about the heartbeat of a community. Good, bad, or indifferent. You're talking about the heartbeat of a community. It's not like closing down a business or closing down, something else. You're talking about closing down a school. That's the hope and the opportunity for that school. We should be trying to reinvest in that school, reinvest in those teachers, and reinvest in those kids.
I want to go to somebody who created Charter School Network, founder of Friendship Public Schools here in D.C. Donald Hense, go right ahead.
What advocates for charter schools, advocates for school choice, period, are saying is that we need quality options for our kids. What we are saying is that we don't have the time to fix a system that has been in decay for 40, 50 years in order to save my child who has 12 years of schooling, okay? And I say that as a grandparent whose grandchildren are homeschooled in one of the wealthiest school districts in America, Palo Alto Unified School District. Understand? My son doesn't feel that the school system works for his children. He has a choice. We all should have choices. No one should say that choice should not be available to a parent because that parent lives in Ward 6, 7, or 8, or some parts of Ward 5 in the District of Columbia. I'm a Washington person, okay? And I just don't believe that. Let me go back to when we started our schools in 1997. The graduation rate in Washington, D.C. was 51%. I felt that I wanted to have some type of impact on that graduation rate. My high schools have a graduation rate of 95%. They didn't just come that way. It took work, and lots of work to make it happen.
And do you cherry pick?
That's a bunch of crock. Let me tell you something. There's something in Washington, D.C. called My School D.C. All children in the District of Columbia who want to go to a charter school have to go on My School DC, and whoever is the first child to enroll, you have to accept. You can't decide who comes to a school. That's been the case. I'm totally unsure where we can cherry pick students. Where does that come from? Urban myth?
And lastly, Donald, first of all, how many schools are now under Friendship Public Charter School?
11 or 12.
11, 12 schools. John Jackson, I want to pull you up, please. And the reason we could say and be real nice about this and say, well, we really are not disagreeing. We're all saying the same thing. The fact of the matter is there are battles that are going on right now all across this country, fierce battles. And there are people, Charter Works has been out there. Hillary has probably gotten lots of emails from them about the NAACP resolution. There are people who have gone after other civil rights groups saying, wait a minute, why do you not want to see this? This is a real battle because as we're seeing growth, we're seeing even Mayor de Blasio, when he got elected in New York, I mean, he flat out targeted charter schools, and people there are saying, man, what are you doing? You have success here. Why are you trying to stop this? There is contention on this issue. How do we get folks to realize that it is about kids, as someone else said, not about a system, not about union contracts, not about who gets a contract, soft drink contract or textbook contract, whether or not our kids are getting educated?
I think we have to, first of all, get beyond the issue. As Dr. Crew already said, choice is here. But we're talking in this conversation about, when we talk about charters and choice, a system that educates about 5% of the nation's students. Let's talk about how we also improve it for the other 95%. Let's get beyond the issue. Let's begin to address the core principles, policies, and practices that are necessary so that all students can have an opportunity to learn.
So if there are 5% who are in charters,
yes,
well then why can't we just simply say, okay, of this whole pie, there are 5% in charters, there are X% in magnet schools, there are X% in trade schools, there are X% in these schools, and say, let's accept all of it. Because there are people who do not want charters, who do not want trade schools. I mean, that's the battle.
There will always be battles, but not much is accomplished through battles. It's when we come together. For example, dispelling false narratives. The narratives that our public school system has failed the African-American community is a false narrative. Let me ask you, how many people here went to a public school? This is Howard University, the majority. Howard University, one of the greatest institutions in our country, and the majority of those here graduated and finished from a public school. So let's start there. Does that not mean that we need to make some gains? Does that not mean? No. It does mean that we need to address some issue, but it's a false narrative. The narrative starts because when most people talk about whether it's a good school or bad school, we're talking about tests. Now, there's clear data that says that whether or not a student performs well on their test has as much to do with what happens outside of the school than what happens inside of the school. So if you have a system where there's clear economic disparities, the public school system is only going to emulate those. If students are going to school and they're hungry, if students are going to school they can't access counselors, let's talk about those things. So the question is not whether or not choice is a black choice. The question is, why is choice only a black choice? Because in white communities, they're not met with this decision because they have the counselors, they have the resources and everything.
Kickstart your day at 7 and get the news you need from the perspective you want. NewsOne Now with Roland Martin, every weekday morning at 7 on TV 1.